So when is that magical moment when parents should recognize their child's behavior has surpassed the boundary of what all children do and has become sufficiently alarming to warrant a formal assessment? There probably isn't one. It is often a gradual awareness that a child's emotional or behavioral development just isn't where it should be, and that sends the most parents and teachers on a quest for answers. Students who have an emotional behavior disorder are often a heterogeneous group. Let's begin by discussing two conditions that may affect students that have an emotional and behavior disorder: depression and bipolar disorder. Depression is often an overlooked problem, and it is common with children who have received a diagnosis of an EBD. There are children in our schools with clinical depression who aren't receiving any services or treatment outside of school, and their educational performance is clearly impacted. Yet the school doesn't identify them. Why do you think that's a problem that is overlooked? Most often, children who have depression are not disrupting the class. They are more often characterized by the internalizing behaviors that we just covered in the last module, and we know that those behaviors are not easily picked up on, so they are not a behavioral problem for teachers. However, overlooking their problems is not the answer because they truly do need help. It is estimated that 2.5% of elementary school children between 4 and 8% of adolescents suffer from depression and do not get the treatment that they need. It is estimated that between 30 and 40% of these children have some form of depression. Depression is usually diagnosed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. The treatment for depression always includes counseling and therapy, and this therapy may be a part of services that are identified on the student's IEP and provided by the school. Treatment may also include medication. The most common medicine to treat depression is antidepressants. Taking medication is a decision that is made by the child and his or her family, and is not made at all by the school, nor can teachers recommend that a family should try medications. Since depression is so overlooked and underdiagnosed, teachers need to be aware of the signs of depression. Teachers may notice students are not concentrating, and they're not motivated to achieve. Teachers may mistakenly focus on the child's lack of effort, on the child's lack of concentration, and may conclude that the child just needs discipline. The root of the child's problem is depression, and simply offering negative reactions is not going to encourage them to be more motivated, to concentrate harder, or to try to achieve more. When educators see a child having difficulty concentrating and seemingly lacking motivation, they should be aware that the underlying cause could be depression. When considering signs of depression, the key sign is persistence. Every child will show some sadness. Every child will have periods when they are a little bored and have low energy. Every child will feel hopeless at some stage in their life. But if a child is clinically depressed, these feelings are chronic. They persist. And that's the most important thing. It's not that the child is going through a little rough patch, just having a bad day, or being in a bad mood. These signs of depression are evident over several months, and a child just doesn't snap out of it. The first sign is chronic sadness. This can be exhibited by frequent crying. It seems like the child is crying for no reason and crying often. Difficulty concentrating and paying attention. Again, in cases of depression, it's not just because the children's priorities are out of order. It's that the depression has overtaken their interests and they can't concentrate because of it. If you see a child who's persistently bored and has low energy, this could be a sign of depression. They don't seem to get excited about anything or bring a lot of energy to their daily lives. Hopelessness is a very important sign to understand. A child doesn't feel that things are going to get better. They don't feel like their actions are going to result in greater happiness. Socially isolating themselves. They don't want to be involved with other children, and this can go along with a decreased interest in activities that they previously enjoyed participating in. A child who is depressed may begin to abuse drugs or alcohol because it changes their consciousness. It offers them an escape from the depression. Of course, it can also lead to worse problems down the road, so turning to drugs and alcohol are not a good way to cope. Having low self-esteem, feeling very, very guilty. Again, we are talking chronically, persistent feelings here. Being especially sensitive to rejection or failure. Perhaps getting a low grade on a test really brings someone down, and they're really, really way too upset over it. If they get rejected by a peer or have a problem with the social relationship, it becomes a gut-wrenching problem and devastating to them. Children who suffer from depression can be irritable, angry, and hostile sometimes, and these are, of course, externalizing behaviors. But sometimes they are most irritable, most angry, and most hostile to the ones that they are closest to. Accompanying depression can be physical symptoms, especially headaches and stomach aches. If a child has frequent complaints about physical illness, that can be a sign along with these other signs that the child may be depressed. If the child is having a lot of difficulty with relationships, if they make efforts to run away from home, that can be another sign of depression. Suicide threats and thoughts are something else to look for. Teachers cannot diagnose depression and should never be so bold as to suggest a diagnosis. Certainly, they should look for these signs of depression, and if they have concerns, be able to talk about their concerns professionally with both parents as well as other school professionals. A teacher's suspicions may lead to an evaluation, which in turn can lead to a proper diagnosis, help for both the child in and out of school. When thinking about suicide, let me ask this question, and it's a rhetorical one. Can a child's life be so miserable from the child's perspective that they decide to commit suicide? I'm sure you answered yes, but sometimes as adults, we can dismiss children's problems and say, oh, things aren't that bad. How could that lead them to commit suicide? What an overly dismissive adult does not understand is that from the child's perspective, their life is miserable, and they are feeling a great deal of hopelessness, and they feel that suicide is their only way out. Now, suicide from the child's perspective provides an escape from what is perceived to be an untenable situation. Any threat a child makes about committing suicide should be taken very seriously. Now, I have in their parentheses, you have to use your judgment, because some children like high drama, and we certainly don't want to force a child who on a very regular and consistent basis claims that they're going to kill themselves. But if you're working with a child who is prone to depression and they make a threat, you certainly need to be very thoughtful and do not dismiss it. Even if a child has threatened it before and is one who likes to dramatize things, to be on the safe side, you should always report the child has threatened to commit suicide to either your school principal or to a social worker, because all threats do need to be taken seriously. Girls are more likely to threaten to commit suicide than boys and are more likely to attempt suicide. However, boys are 4 times more likely to be successful in it. So there is a gender difference. Therefore, if a boy is threatening to commit suicide, it needs to be taken doubly seriously because boys will be more likely to follow through. A suicide threat can be a cry for help. It can be a situation where the child's saying, I really need someone to get involved with me and help me out. With a serious suicide threat, teachers should not try to handle it by themselves. They do not have the expertise to handle it alone. A teacher should immediately let a school psychologist, the principal, the school social worker, so that the right person can come in who has experience handling such situations and can try to talk to the child. Although we want to take all threats seriously, there is one threat that truly needs to send off a red flag, and that it cannot be ignored. That is when the child has a plan. So if there is any indication that the child has given thought to committing suicide and actually has planned something out, if a child would say, I know there's a big bridge by my house, and I know if I jump off of it, I would die. Or I can just sit in front of a train track and the train comes by every day at 5:15. If somebody has a specific plan, then it warrants special consideration, and you have a moral obligation to let a professional know about the situation as soon as possible and make sure somebody intervenes for that child. Moving on to bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder used to be called manic depressive disorder. The term that professionals use today is bipolar disorder. The increase in diagnosis of children with bipolar disorder has been staggering. 16 years ago, it was 1 in 5,000, and today it's projected to be 1 in every 100 children. Now, with that said, that number seems high to a lot of professionals in the field of mental health. The truth is, it's difficult to get accurate data. Bipolar disorder is characterized by going through manic stages and depressive stages. In the manic stage, the child is really too happy. I know that sounds odd, but the child is just feeling invincible. They're feeling that everything is just super, super great. So a child who is just too happy and optimistic, they are high as a kite on life, overly silly, giddy, and feel like they're walking on air. This is one extreme, and this is the manic stage. When a child is in a manic stage, there are some dangers because with such high self-esteem and such optimistic outlook, it goes overboard where one loses perspective on cautions one should employ. So it's been described as children feeling like they're superheroes with magical powers, but they don't have magical powers. And this can lead them to taking great risks. The manic stage leads to a crash, and that's when the child will go into a depressive stage. The depressive stage is just like what we talked about in depression in the earlier piece of information. So the same signs of depression when a child is diagnosed as clinically depressed will be seen in bipolar disorder, except there are these mood swings between manic and depression. The same things you look for in a depressed child: irritability, sadness, physical illness, loss of enjoyment of a favorite activity, low energy level, feeling hopeless, feeling despair. That's what you see in a child with bipolar disorder. The same dangers go along with the depressive stage, including thoughts of suicide and a risk for suicide. So bipolar disorder involves these extreme mood swings. And in order to really function as a happy, successful person, the mood swings need to get less extreme. With bipolar disorder, the severity differs from child to child, and therefore people's reaction and treatment differs. Some children go through these mood swings, but they never go off the deep end, so to speak. It's just a matter of making the mood swings less intense. With other children, it's extreme mood swings, and they become very, very difficult to handle when either at a high point of the manic stage or the low point of the depressive stage. With some people, they react very well to treatment and respond very well, but others don't. In any case, the child is going to need counseling and therapy, and the counseling needs to focus on enabling the child to understand his or her condition and to begin to self-monitor. Effective counseling often assists somebody in realizing when they're heading into a manic or depressive stage, and also realizing that they may need help as they go into these stages. Medication is used to treat bipolar disorder, but it can be very controversial. Some people worry about overprescription of medication to treat kids with a bipolar diagnosis, but medication can be a part of an effective treatment plan. And finally, with bipolar disorders, there's always counseling provided to the family because living with a child with bipolar disorder can be very hard on parents and other family members, so they need support as well. We've covered different disorders that a student with EBD may battle. When a student engages in behavior, what does the school have to do? IDEA's discipline procedures require schools to conduct what is known as a manifestation determination review. The purpose of this review is to determine whether or not the child's behavior that led to the disciplinary infraction is linked to his or her disability. Manifestation determinations were first introduced into IDEA with the 1997 amendments. The process has been simplified under IDEA 2004, which now limits the requirement to perform a manifestation determination to removals that constitute a change of placement underneath IDEA's disciplinary procedures, and does not require a manifestation determination for removals less than 10 consecutive days that do not constitute a change in placement. Under the federal law, children with disabilities have the right to FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. No child can be turned away from public school because he or she has a disability. Obviously, if you kick a child out of school by expelling him, then the child is being rejected and is not receiving a free public education. The idea is that some rules are important, that if children cannot abide by them, they shouldn't be allowed to attend, and it wouldn't be fair to have rules for children without disabilities and not for children with disabilities. So, what should be done if a child with an IEP commits an expellable offense? To resolve this dilemma, the law requires the application of a concept called manifestation determination. Here's the bottom line. A school can suspend a child for up to 10 days, even if the problem behavior is related to the child's disability. Up to 10 days is considered a short-term suspension. The school has the right to suspend this child for up to 10 days as long as that would be the same punishment imposed on a child without an IEP. But once a child has 10 days of continuous or cumulative suspension, the child is entitled to a manifestation determination hearing. Under IDEA 2004 guidelines, educators must determine whether the behavior in question was caused by or has a direct and substantial relationship to the child's disability, or if the behavior was the direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. Also, if the child's school had developed an IEP and this child was supposed to have a paraprofessional or aide with him in the cafeteria and the school did not provide one, then the school would have failed to implement the IEP and the child could not be suspended for more than 10 days. Manifestation determination is written into federal law and requires that in situations involving suspension for more than 10 days, a school's discipline policy cannot be the same for all students. So, should a school's discipline policy in terms of suspension and expulsion be the same for all students? The answer is no. The school should consider the unique circumstances of a child with an IEP. If the problem behavior is a manifestation of the child's disability, or if the school did not provide the services in the IEP that could have prevented the problem behavior from happening, then the school cannot suspend for more than 10 school days. The only form of discipline that manifestation determination is relevant to is suspensions that last over 10 days during the school year. Detention, community service, Saturday school, in-school suspension, or other restrictions of privileges do not require a manifestation determination hearing. I want to make it clear that multiple suspensions of less than 10 days can be imposed, but once the child has been removed from a placement for a total of 10 school days in the same school year, the district must conduct a manifestation determination hearing if they want to suspend a child for additional days. So, it is not a case that the school can suspend a child for 10 days, then let him come back for 1 day, and then suspend for 10 more days. That's not how it works. The 10 days are cumulative school days during a school year. The two key questions to answer in a manifestation determination hearing are, was the behavior related to the child's disability? And was the behavior the result of the school's failure to implement the IEP? To answer these questions, here are some examples of more detailed questions. Does the student know right from wrong? Does the disability limit the student's ability to handle stressful situations? Does the disability interfere with the student's ability to build or maintain appropriate peer and teacher relationships? Does the disability interfere with the student's ability to learn how to appropriately express his or her feelings? If through the manifestation determination hearing, it is determined that the problem behavior was a manifestation of the disability, then there can be no further suspension or expulsion, and the IEP team needs to come up with a BIP or behavior intervention plan. to prevent the behavior from happening again in the future. The IEP team is charged with deciding whether or not the problem behavior was a manifestation of the child's disability. If the parent who is on the IEP team, but that parent disagrees with the educator and the IEP team doesn't come to a total consensus, then a due process hearing is initiated, and the state's hearing officer would be one to make the final determination. If the behavior is not a manifestation of the disability, then whatever school discipline rules call for can be imposed on a child. Let's say there was a child who was deaf, who had typical intellectual functioning, and was caught stealing at school. If the school rules calls for expulsion for stealing, then the deaf child could be expelled because there is no logical relationship between stealing and the disability. However, even though the child would not be allowed to come back to school until he or she served her expulsion time, the school must still provide an education to the child because the child has an IEP and has a right to an education. The child may receive homebound instruction or maybe instruction in an alternative school, so there could also be a change of placement. It's important to remember that behaviors exist on a continuum and that there is no specific line that separates troubling behavior from a serious emotional problem. Rather, a problem can range from mild to serious. A child is said to have a specific diagnosis or disorder when his or her behaviors occur frequently and are severe. A diagnosis represents a best guess based on the child's behaviors that he or she has a specific mental health issue and not just a problem that all children may have from time to time. In the next module, we'll talk about more strategies that are effective for students with an emotional behavior disorder.